Then I got into the gaming space and gaming and entertainment, and worked on mobile games and mobile apps for a while, at which point I was actually building, designing, and developing with big group of people already fairly big apps, including the entire process, the entire life cycle. So from acquisition of users to engagement with the products to eventual monetization to retention and all of that stuff. And in that process, I started to pick up different tools and always reading, and turns out that's where I discovered that was the idea of taking a concept or a product of something that might solve a problem for a set of users and providing it to them in a way that eventually earns some sort of a profit. That's basically product management. And there's obviously a lot of assets to it. And so I stayed with that. I also did consulting for a while because I like the process of improving on processes, again, on business processes and customer interaction processes and all this stuff. And eventually that led me to Google, where now I've been working for a few years on a few different products: Android, Play, Google Ads, and a lot of exciting stuff to be done there. But my interest in business and product management also led me to start a YouTube channel and chat with fine folks like yourselves about how to be better in business, how to scale products, and how to get better and better at product management. And so that's what I try to do now, and hopefully we can chat about some stuff that's important for you as well.
Very hands-on and interesting journey here. Also, I'm sure like most of us are big fans of the channel. So thanks a lot for that.
Sure.
Do you want to talk a bit about the topic before I ask questions?
Yeah, that sounds good. So the topic today is telemetry, metrics, feature prioritization. And I'm going to tackle it from a little bit from the end, because before you dive, it's easy to get bombarded by the number of different analytical tools there are now, and different statistical analysis, and how to measure, and even what to measure. But before all that, it's important the most important thing is, without complicating things too much, just make sure you understand what your product is and what problem you're actually solving for users. So even though the topic today is telemetry, metrics, feature prioritization, I always start with, do you know what you're doing, what problem you're solving for your users? Do you really? Do you understand your users? Do you understand their actual need and their motivation, if possible? So pretty much any question about business and product management is going to start from that. Do you understand what's happening? If not, make sure you understand what's happening, what business you're in, what your product actually does, or what you want it to do. Next, make sure you understand what stage you're in. So has your product already been launched? Are users already interacting with it? Do you have some information that you could glean by looking at the usage data? Because that's really the whole point of analytics. It's not to swim around in big data and be surrounded by numbers like that scene from Hangover with the guy doing math. It's really about precisely capturing what is happening with your product and the user and the interaction therein, right? That's the purpose of it. Then after you take that information, your job is going to be, as a product manager, is to figure out why this is happening and how it can be improved. So that's like the high level of why we're doing anything. Next, after you figure out what's actually happening, what your product does, what the problem is, and how your product provides the solution, then you can start thinking about your product vision, and preferably how it aligns to your overall company vision, because we're all part of, either some organization. If you're a startup, maybe your product is the company. If you're in a big company, like Microsoft and Netflix and what have you, your product is probably going to be a piece of a bigger product, which is a piece of a bigger series of products, which is the piece of the company. So it's important to understand what is the mission, what is the vision for all of those units that have to do with you and your product. Once you understand that, then we're getting closer to feature prioritization, because you now know what your objective is, what you're trying to accomplish. After you know what you're trying to accomplish, usually like Google and other top companies, they use the process of OKR, which is objective and key result. And there's a lot written about it. You can read some good books on the topic, but at a very high level, objective is what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So it is your goal. So if you are an early stage startup, your objective might be to get some sort of traction or usage, or it might be to launch the product, or it might be to make the best of something, or it might actually be to get to a profit if you're a little bit later on. It depends on what your goal is, like depending on where you are in the life cycle of the product. So let me just walk you through a few examples. If you are in an early startup, you need to be clear about what the goal is. Is the goal to actually get capital to the next stage? Or are you trying to become profitable and trying to self-finance? Like, what is your end stage goal? Is your end stage goal, for instance, for Netflix, is to entertain the world? Or your end stage goal could be to produce this niche type of content, for instance, or solve this small problem for this select group of people. Be clear about the goal, and goals can change, and they definitely will change, but you need to get clear about the goal and have that align with your product objective and your mission objective. So once you have that, that's the objective piece. The key result piece is, what are the things you're going to see in the world that have to do with products and your users that are going to tell you that you've achieved your objective? How are you going to know if you reached it? So you always want to have these sort of exit criteria. You want to understand, and that's where the metrics piece comes in, is when you set your goal, you want to be able to know, number one, when you've reached it, how fast you've reached it, when you are halfway through it, when you're at a certain point. You want to know when you might be headed a different direction. And those are going to be your key results. What are going to be the things that you're going to see in the world in your product that are going to tell you, yep, you're there. You're on the right path. You're making progress. So if your goal is to get to profitability, for instance, you've got your costs, you've got your revenue, and you've got to get those numbers to line up. So your goal might be, the key result might be the difference between costs and revenue. If you are trying to scale to a certain number of users, the key goal might be X number of users. If you're trying to get deeper engagement, it might be hours spent on the platform, something like that. So those key results, those pieces of data that you're going to see, are going to tell you how close you are to reaching your goal. We'll talk more about OKRs a little bit later on. And so after you've got your objective set up, you get your goal set up, then you can start thinking about your roadmap. Your roadmap is going to be the set of things that you want to do with the product that are going to eventually reach you to your objective, have the product reach the objective. And the roadmap is going to be, you're going to take multiple inputs. You're going to get user inputs, stakeholders' inputs, your own thoughts, different departments within it. You're going to look at what is happening in the market, what changes might happen, what competitors are doing. If you want to go the route of checking competitors, sometimes you don't. And you take all those inputs and you formulate a plan for what might get you closer to that objective faster. And from that, you start to form your roadmap. And so feature prioritization is going to allow you to formulate your roadmap in the way of, okay, here are the things that I'm doing in the short term, midterm, and long term, or just short term and long term. And the simple way, we can get a lot more into this, but I don't want to overdo the talking here. I would rather have a few simple ideas that you get and understand than like a whole textbook. So for features, think about it like this. You've got the effort that you have to expend, and the effort is actual engineering time, if engineers are building it, or your time if you're building it and you're a solo entrepreneur. For this group, I'm assuming we're mostly APMs, or early stage product managers, so we're going to have some piece of a product to represent, and there's going to be an engineering team. So effort is going to be, what's the engineering team effort that is needed to do this? What is the organizational effort that's required to bring these people together? If you've got a concept that is very difficult, people don't agree on it, then it's going to take a lot of effort to get it done. And then there's going to be cost. There's going to be stuff you just have to pay for. So it's time, it's money, it's engineering effort, it's organizational effort, it's complexity, and it's also the probability of success, right? Like certain features have a certain probability of success, which you can also glean from certain usage or your intuition or a combination of both. And so that whole piece puts together your effort. Then there's your impact. What's going to happen if it is successful? How is it going to change and get you closer to those key results, which will allow you to accomplish those objectives? And if the impact is great and the effort is low, then that's going to give you a great, that's going to go probably in early on in the prioritization. So the very simple way of prioritization is effort versus impact. And the I think cleaner way to think about it is your impact divided by your effort, as opposed to impact minus your effort, because that's going to give you the most bang for your buck, the most impact for the least effort. And so that's like the basics of feature prioritization. There's going to be a lot more stuff you can put into it, but at least at a basic level, I want you to think about it like that. How can you get yourself as close as possible to your key results that are going to get you to the objective, having invested as little as possible resources? That's going to be your basic feature prioritization. The metrics piece comes in when you're starting to think about what to measure and how to measure. And what to measure is going to be as close as possible to those key results. So if you're trying, like I said, if you're trying to get to profitability, your key results are going to be revenue up, costs down on a very fundamental level. So on a very basic level, you've got to capture those metrics. With metrics, a couple of things to keep in mind. After you figured out what metrics you have to track, and these have to be metrics about the product or your customers or your users' interaction with the product or the environment in which your product and users reside. After you've captured that, you've got to make sure that it's stable, so it's going to continue. So you've got some sort of either backup, or you're using one of third-party solutions that you can be confident that the data will be stored and there won't be problems. Number two, test it to make sure that it's actually capturing the correct data. So again, this could be a very complicated process. In bigger companies, they've got, big dashboards and metrics automatically feeding and updating. Or you can, if you're working for yourself, you could have a spreadsheet where you physically type in, hey, how many users visited today? How much money did I make today? Or you could be somewhere in between where you're building these from third-party analytics provider like Google Analytics for web or AppsFlyer for apps. And so you're tracking, that's going to be the what. You're tracking your metrics and values. And then the next step is going to be what you're actually gleaming from that information. So usually when we think about metrics, we think about a couple things. We think about North Star metrics. Those are going to be your key pieces. Those are going to be the key results we talked about. So some big things, if you're moving in that direction, you can track where you are in the journey and how fast you're moving towards your results and any outliers. So that's going to be the what. But the other thing to think about in metrics is product health. So those are going to be your secondary supporting metrics that are going to tell you things that are adjacent to your overall North Star metric, but they're telling you about how the different pieces are coming together within the product and how they're operating. So you might have customer service complaints, you might have crashes, you might have time spent, number of times accessed, like number of daily actives or monthly actives, or monthly over daily or daily over monthly rather. Those are secondary. They're telling you more information about the trajectory of where you're headed, a little bit finer grain. Whereas the North Star might tell you, okay, here's where I am, here's how fast I'm moving. The other metrics might tell you more pieces of that story that'll tell you where you are and how fast you're going towards your goal. And then the other thing you got to keep in mind is countermetrics. Countermetrics are specific metrics that you've put in place to make sure that not just your product is doing well, even if your North Star metrics are showing you're hitting it out of the park, great success, all the numbers are through the roof, but then your countermetrics are telling you how it's affecting adjacent products that the company may have, how it is affecting the overall company mission. So what if your product is doing well, but it's cannibalizing other products from your sister departments? That's not a result that you want at a big or medium company or even a small company. If you've got marketing and sales working against each other, marketing saying, look how much we're spending dollars, how many people we're bringing in, but sales is unable to actually catch up to qualify and meet with all those leads that are bringing in, well, then you've got an issue. So for marketing, yes, you're bringing in a lot of leads. You got to have that countermetrics, okay? But what's happening with those leads down as they continue in the funnel with other departments? Are they doing well? Are they quality leads? Or are we just giving ourselves vanity metrics? Yeah, we got great numbers, big, high, but actually it's having detrimental effect on the rest of the company. So those are the key aspects of metrics. You've got your core component, North Star. you got your secondary metrics, product health, and then you got your counter metrics, which let you know other things in the company. So that's it in a nutshell. I think now we could jump into other questions, Q&A. I think it'll be helpful so that we don't spend too much on theory here.
Yeah, that's a great summary though for the entire process, including metrics and prioritization. So building on what you started with, that we have to align business objectives with the metrics that we are considering. How do we align that? In a more general sense, what is the data analytics process that you go through as a PM when you're just beginning to do it?
Sure. So again, always this is going to start with where I am in my product, where I am in my business, and what am I actually trying to accomplish. So I think the most important test there is going to be when you choose your metric, if you move it, does it clearly tell you the picture of how close you are to your goal? And if it does not, or if it tells you something that's not quite clear or could be perceived as two different things, then that's not a great metrics. And that you want to test that. So that's, I think, your question was like, what's your process? I think the process is actually coming up with a list of potential metrics that, when changed, are going to tell us something about the world that would allow us to surmise that we've reached our goal. And so what we do is I make a list of potential metrics, and then I test them, I move them around, and I ask myself, okay, is that unambiguously, when this metric is at this point, is that unambiguous that we've reached the objective, or could this be misinterpreted or interpreted in multiple ways? If it can be interpreted in multiple ways, that's not a great key metric. Might be a secondary metric that might help understand some picture, but it's not going to be a great key North Star metric. Also, just maybe to get a little bit more practical, I tend to think about the user flow. So from the very beginning, when the user finds out about the product, how does the user find out about the product? What happens when they found out about the product? And I think about the user flow and the funnel that the user has to go through. And I make sure that I capture these critical stages of the funnel with different metrics or similar metrics if possible, so that I can be confident that I'm actually moving the user forward in the funnel towards where I want them to go. So I think on a practical basis, it comes back to thinking about why and what your product actually does and what the experience looks like for the user. And I'm sure we can, later on if we have time, we can take like specific examples and think about, in our example of you're trying to increase your revenue. So to increase your revenue, you might need to get more leads. If you're thinking of like a traditional business or even a software as a service, you might need to get more leads. Then you go through a funnel of qualifying those leads, interacting with those leads, having some sort of a trial, support, maintenance, then maybe a conversion to a paid plan, then maybe retention to a longer term paid plan. So that's your entire funnel. And when you're setting your goals, which goals do I want to set? How do I want that user experience to change? And what do I expect to happen as a result? And so you're going through each one of these pieces of the funnel and you're testing these metrics. Okay, so if we increase the number of leads, is that unambiguous? Is that going to tell me that we're doing well? Maybe, maybe not. What about the number of sales calls that we make? What about the number of trial signups? Maybe trial signups. That's unambiguous. If we have 10 times more trial signups, we're doing well. Well, yes and no, because that doesn't mean that you're actually converting these trial signups. But it might be important if you're trying to go for growth. So that it all comes back to the beginning of where you are, what you actually want to do.
That's awesome. So are there any specific tools and methodologies you use to track these metrics that you come up?
I think, yeah, so I don't want people to spend too much time on the tools themselves. The important thing is you're capturing the data that's important. You're not getting overwhelmed by trying to capture every little thing. I've definitely made that mistake. When you're working on a mobile app, you can capture everything. You can capture where the users tap around on the screen. And we've done that with heat maps and all of this stuff. But ask yourself, when you're capturing data, a lot of the times too much data is just as much of a problem as not enough data. So ask yourself, is this data piece going to give you the most impact? So when you're capturing heat maps, like when we were doing a certain point, maybe it was helpful, but maybe we could have focused on something else a little bit higher up in the funnel where it would have had a bigger effect. So for tools, I've used everything from just spreadsheets. When I was doing a business on my own, I would just make a spreadsheet that I would manually update to of course, when you're working on the web, like I said, Google Analytics or any other analytics tool, because again, you want to capture different metrics for different stages in the funnel. So if you're doing a web product, you want to know how many users are coming to your site, from where, why are they headed there? Is it like a paid channel or a free channel or some sort of a partnership? So what method? And then how long are they staying? How are they balancing? What are they interacting with on the screen? You want to capture all of those data pieces. Google Analytics is great for web. Apps Flyer, Adjust, great for apps. And there's a whole suite of other analytical tools that you can add on, ones with extra functionality, like setting up your e-commerce, like store, or setting up further notifications, push notifications, email notifications, integrating all-in-one solutions. I would not overthink this too much. Also, there's internal tools that you can build if you're working for a bigger company. There's a lot of times there's going to be internal dashboards that are maintained. And I would, again, focus on less being more, and just make sure, instead of vanity metrics, that you're putting stuff on there that if you see it change, it means something, right? You know what it means. So that's what I would focus on. But in terms of analytics, there's a ton of tools out there.
Yeah, so the focus is maybe less on tools and more on which metrics do we want to zero down on.
Very much. Yeah, I think that's a great summary, because you don't want to overdo this part. I've had situations, I'm sure we've all had this, but I've had this more than others, where I'm sitting around and I'm like, all right, let me try to solve this problem. I need a great tool, and then I spend the day looking for the tool, and that's just silly. Like, really, anything will do, as long as you understand. Do you really understand what problem you're trying to solve? Sometimes we will procrastinate by looking for tools because we're not quite clear of what we're trying to actually implement.
That's true. And in fact, in digital products, I think we have a ton load of data to go with. So we always have data. It's just which data to pick. So when
Exactly.
when you're tracking these metrics, we generally set metric thresholds to see that if we are going well or not. So how is that metric threshold decided? Is it solely based on data or intuition, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, so when setting thresholds and thinking about, okay, what do I actually want? Think about the next stage of your product. Like, what does it mean for your product to be in the next stage? And so for that, it's helpful to think about a couple of things. If you're a smaller company, it's helpful to think about user funnel, what we talked about, which is what are the different points at which I interact with the user, and what is required to get the user to the next point. Because as the funnel, you start out with a funnel, let's say with 100 users, 40 are going to leave right away, then 20 get lost because they don't understand what your product is, 10 more click the wrong thing, 5 try to interact with you, and then you don't get back to them, and like all of these issues. And so you're trying to enact, okay, where is the biggest bottleneck where I can affect, and what will I need to do to that bottleneck in order to have the funnel continue successfully. So that's one way, just thinking about the funnel and where you can impact it, and it will become apparent of what you need to do. So if you're starting with 100 but ending up with 1 user, you know that's maybe it's ineffective, maybe it's effective depending on how many hundreds you can actually bring in. There's different strategies for what you want to do. But the second piece of that is think about where you are as a product and company, and what's the next stage for you. What does the next stage look like? Is it to demonstrate growth, like week on week, month on month growth? For early stage startups, very important. It's more important than profitability, absolute numbers. It's important. How fast are you growing? And is it sustainable? And is it increasing over time? Are you growing 50% week over week? That's going to be hard to sustain. But if you're going for growth, you're going to need to try to sustain it. So as an early stage startup, you might think about, how do I set, that's going to be your threshold. You want it at that level. You don't want it to be 200% week over week. That's going to be hard to sustain. You want it to sustain and grow and go up. If you are somewhere in the middle, you're about to launch a product, think about what does it take in order to be able to continue to work for your product on your product for another year. What does success look like? Do you need to sell $100 million worth to be successful, or do you need $10 million worth to be successful? What does success look like in your company? What are other successful products? So those are all good barometers to think about. Let me see if there's anything else. Ultimately, again, it requires clarity of thought about where you are and where you want to be. So you need to understand where your company is or where your product is. So for instance, if profitability is important, what level of profitability? What are stakeholders expecting? What is expected in your company or in your field? You might look at the market size. You might look at like what the market can actually bear. Again, if you're in the very, very bigger size of things, the biggest companies, they already compete for entire marketplaces. So then you can ask yourself, what does it mean to capture a piece of this market? What does it look like from top down? How many dollars or how many hours or how many users are there in this marketplace? What does it mean to capture some of them? What do my competitors have, et cetera? So it depends on where you are. It's kind of how you think about those barometers.
Right. So when you said that you can always keep on iterating and setting new thresholds and working along with it, how often do you reevaluate the metrics as a team?
So it depends. In bigger companies, you're probably going to do this quarterly basis and annually. So you're going to set quarterly goals, you're going to reevaluate, and it's kind of this, because bigger companies tend to move a lot slower. And so you've got a much bigger ship that you need to steer. And so you're saying, okay, here are my goals for the next quarter. What are your goals for the next quarter? How about their goals for the next quarter? This department, that department. Okay, and by the time everybody set their goals, it's time to tally up the goals, because that's how long it takes. It's like this nonstop quarterly. It's almost like a little bit of a joke at the bigger companies. You're done setting your goals, and then you start making the next quarter goals. Like, that's how long those processes take. And then somewhere in the middle of the year, you make your annual goals. How about next year? When it comes to mid-sized company, you might look at monthly. When it comes to startups, weekly, daily, depends. If you're just starting a business by yourself or just a couple of co-founders, you're going to be constantly. It's not even daily. It's just all the time. You're just always looking at your metrics. You don't want to over bombard yourself for sure, because you're only one person or a small group of people. So you want to constantly keep an eye on the metrics, make sure you're tracking. Here are my visits, number of visits, or number of purchases, whatever I'm trying to enact. And you're saying, okay, do I need to tweak this? Do I need to tweak that?
So I do have a lot more questions, but I want to take everybody else's questions first. So I'll just share this. Wait, I'll just let
Let's do it.
Share the screen. Yeah, so that we can take everybody's questions. Okay.
Should I just start answering them from the top?
Yes, please.
Okay, great. So the question is, in interviews, it's often expected we'll discuss weaknesses of metrics we're discussing. What are some trade-offs, downsides of some common metrics? Okay, so in interviews, so I guess the question is, when you're talking about metrics, you could kind of like what we talked about. Some metrics could mean that you're making good progress, but does it mean that something else is happening elsewhere? So I would say that probably there's no necessarily downsides to metrics. I guess you could say, okay, so if you're capturing daily active users, for instance, that doesn't tell you anything about whether the user is having a good time in there, whether you're bringing in a ton of new users or your old users are coming back, right? It's a vanity metric. So maybe that's kind of what the question is alluding to. So some metrics where it goes back to what we talked about, which is unambiguous. If your time spent per active key cohort user is going up, that's unambiguous. They're spending more time in the app. By the way, even that could be ambiguous because maybe they're spending more time because there's more crashes and they're just stuck on a certain screen. They can't move forward, right? So you could keep doing this forever, but some things, of course, are more kind of more solid than others. So when you think about a metrics, just make sure you think about it in terms of the whole product or the whole company, if you could. So keep those counter metrics in mind that we talked about. In terms of common metrics, yeah, of course, you've got your active users are good ones, your maybe absolute number of visits or absolute time of engagement, even your total number of engagement. Generally, absolute numbers are more suspect than relational. Ratios of some kind. So, for instance, per user, revenue spent in this particular cohort, or again, time spent. Is it growing or is it falling? Basically, anything where you can capture the rate of change of something, as opposed to absolute numbers. Like we earned $100,000. Okay, it's $100,000, but what is the dollar per order? What is the dollar per user? It's going to be a little bit more useful than absolute numbers. Next question. Did you work on any features that involved the partnership alignment with multiple companies? How can someone validate the idea before pitching it to execs? Oh, thanks. Yep, glad you like that answer. So for this question, on big companies, there's always going to be alignment with multiple departments. If you're talking about alignment of multiple companies, that's usually some sort of either a partnership or an agreement where you're basically paying or you're being paid to do something or to have something done. And so I feel like these are a little bit like two different questions, because the first one is, unfortunately, it just takes a lot of time. The bigger the company, the more people are involved. Unfortunately, the time and effort necessary to do it goes up exponentially. And the way to think about it is, if you've got 3 people in a group, then each person only needs to talk to 2 people in order to hash everything out. But if you got 4, now each person needs to talk to 3 people, and so on. So if you got 10, each person needs to talk to 9 people, and there's 10 people, so it goes up exponentially. And the same thing with the more departments, the more companies, the more people, the more directors, VPs, stakeholders, it becomes exponential, very hard to manage, and you should expect that it's going to take a long time and not be frustrated by it. Conversely, that's kind of the great thing about startups is it's all up to you and your small group of nimble co-founders. So the velocity is a lot different. And then the second part of the question is, how can you validate the idea before pitching it to execs? There's a couple of ways. Again, bigger companies probably have done some user research. It could be quantitative, it could be qualitative. So quantitative is we look at the data, what's happening, and we leverage that. Qualitative, we ask people about their experience, or we interpret their subjective experience, whatever it is. You can leverage both of those in order to pitch the idea. You can also use market situations, competitive insights. So what are others doing? Where is a certain industry heading? And it's perfectly okay to use those pieces in order to back up your idea or concept. Because by definition, think about it, it's of course impossible to validate the idea before you've done it, unless someone has done it before. So if someone has done it before, then you just bring that as much information as you can about it. If no one has done it before, you're going to have to find similar things, right? And then show how your idea is similar but a little bit different, and utilize the metrics from the real world. So it's going to be a combination of the closer your idea is to an original idea, which basically don't exist at this point, but they're very, very hard to find. And I would not necessarily search for original ideas. A lot of young entrepreneurs want to look for original ideas. That's really not required, and you kind of prevent yourself from getting experience if you're always trying to think, oh, here comes my original thought. But the closer your idea is to original, the harder it is going to be to actually pitch it, which is why the most original ideas are usually done by startups that can just convince a few small investors to actually fund their ideas. It's harder to push these ideas in these big companies. And then the closer it is to something that's been done before, the easier it is to say, here, this is how they've done it, but with a little twist. Here's what's happened. Here are the assets that we can bring to bear. Here's why we can do it even better. And then just repeat that for a couple of quarters, and you're set. All right, next question. For already proven product market fit, what's a better approach? Going to market with MVP ASAP, adding value to the existing idea first by taking time. Okay, so you can't really prove product market fit unless you've launched already. So if you've launched already, then you've got an MVP out there. So, and if you don't, then you don't have product market fit, because product market fit, you got to have a product, and then the market has to take it, be excited about it, and it just works. And product market fit is this thing that I basically maybe have never really had it, and have still had some successful companies. So it's like, it's a really tough thing to get. And everybody thinks of it different, but if you want to read up on product market fit, you know, all the Y Combinator stuff, they've got great things to say about that. I would just say that number one is always better. Going to market with MVP, in my mind, it's always better. Just launch the thing, because until a customer uses your product, you don't actually know if any of your ideas are true. I'm sure you've heard this before, but that definitely bears repeating. It's very, very important. Number two, adding value to an existing idea. It's, in my mind, it's hard to add value to a thing that users are not interacting with. So you don't really know what the users want. You only think you know what users want. And so after you've launched it, even if you get 10 or 100 customers, now you can already start to add value by understanding what problem you're actually solving. Hopefully that answers the question. What are the better metrics to measure content-centric products? Okay, so content-centric products like a blog or news aggregator or something of those lines. Well, actually, that's great. So it's a great question, because we can do a little case study here. We can think content-centric. So that means that your product is about surfacing interesting content. I mean, ultimately, TikTok is a content-centric product, right? You're surfacing content that's interesting for users, and they consume the content. Or Netflix, right? Netflix is a content-centric product. So those two are good. You know, my mind instantly went to something like a news or something like a written form, but of course it could be any type of content. So when you think about it, you probably want deep engagement with your content. And if you can, look at the motivation underneath that. Why are people consuming your content? For instance, you know, Facebook newsfeed is a content-centric product, but I'm not sure how much utility people are getting. And by that I mean enjoyment and how better they feel after consuming said content. And I don't know. I mean, I don't consume that content, so I don't know. But from what I hear, it's not very positive these days. And so you can have a product where, or like you think about TV in the 80s or 90s, where kids would just consume the content for 4 or 5 hours a day. Yeah, they're consuming the content, but it's pretty terrible what it's doing to them. So you've got to keep all that in mind. So I try to go a little bit deeper and go for ultimate motivation, like what's actually happening, why are they consuming the content, why is it good for them? Yeah, you've got suggestions. Yeah, likes, shares, NPS, so satisfaction metrics. Those are all great. But as long as you're thinking about it from the perspective of why are people consuming it, how am I making their lives better? Again, the bigger the company, the more you can ask questions like that. The smaller the company, the more you have to sometimes do these things that sometimes even exploit the human psychology as opposed to deliver actual value. So it depends on where you're on the spectrum. The biggest company can afford to kind of walk the path of saying, okay, let me implement features to prevent you from consuming too much content because it's bad for you. But the smaller companies can't afford that luxury because they're trying to survive, and they have obviously a lot leaner structure. But again, getting back, I'm getting a little philosophical. I tend to do that, but because I always ask, why are we doing anything? Why are users interacting with your product? Why are you doing? What problem are you solving? But getting back to a more practical approach, yeah, I think all of those will work. I would imagine on the first surface, you might say, okay, likes read-throughs, how long are they just like scanning? For instance, again on Facebook, there was a situation where, or maybe this was Twitter, where they found that, I think this was Twitter, they found that people share news articles without reading them. So it's nonsense, right? But and they realized that, and this spreads, and this actually spreads misinformation, and it spreads weird things. And so a metric that you might implement is, okay, did they actually read this article? Did they scan and read it? So that might show you something. Netflix has, how deep did you go into the content, piece of content? Did you complete it? Did you get to 70, 80%? Did you complete it? Did you then like it? Did you then share it? Did you then resubscribe? What happened then? You want to look for that deeper engagement. So start out with the simplest thing. Consumer told you they like it, and then go deeper. What happens as a result of that? What are second order consequences, third order consequences as they're consuming, as you're creating more of this content? So think about all that stuff. Probably more than what you wanted to know, but yeah, you got great answers right in the chat here. Likes, shares, satisfaction, usage, engagement, all of that stuff.
So
how does one move? Yeah, do we still have time?
Yeah, let's take this last question. And then,
okay. Yeah. How does one move from a tiny, small-scale startup to a large tech company's APM? Well, you should apply to all of these companies. If you want to work at the big companies, you should definitely apply. I applied without a referral, so you can get in without a referral. But you can also, referrals are an easy way to get like past the recruiter screen and all that stuff. But in reality, like, you just want to work on this a little bit as a marathon. You don't necessarily want to just jump. Here I go to Microsoft. Sometimes you can, and I know a lot of the folks that are contacting me are already like APMs or interns, and they are working at these big companies. But it does take time. It does take a lot of applications, sometimes multiple years, multiple attempts. Practical aspects. Build stuff while you're applying to these companies. Always be building stuff that you find interesting, that other people find interesting. Get better at product management. Read, and most importantly, do. And get better at interviewing. Interviewing is this whole thing, especially in product management, especially top tech companies. You basically can't get in unless you understand. You've got hands-on experience. You've built these products, but you also understand how to interview, and you've internalized some of these things that are talked about when you read these interview books and look at the interview videos. So all of the three things of those you need to be working on in parallel at all times, without expectations of immediate success. If you like product management, if you like business, and you want to eventually work at these top companies, just keep doing it, and I'm sure you'll get them. How are we doing on time?
So we just have 5 minutes. So, but this has been really great, actually awesome, because the most practical knowledge I can gain in 1 hour, I wouldn't have gained it anywhere else. But on metrics specifically, because this is a topic we keep struggling with in terms of getting practical hands-on information. So this has been really helpful. We have 5 minutes left. I'll let you do a few closing remarks, and then we'll close it off.
Yeah, so I think that was actually the perfect question for my closing remarks. I would say that just the fact that you're here today already puts you in a group of self-selected high performers. And the only thing that I would encourage you is to think of this truly as a long effort, a long sustained effort. You win if you can keep doing this for a long time, and if you enjoy the process itself, right? And that's why the very first thing I always ask everyone is, are you sure you want to get into product management? I have some videos actually that talk about like the key qualities of a product manager, especially at big companies. You really want to make sure that you meet those criteria, because it's going to be a pretty frustrating time otherwise. It's a lot of communication, a lot of collaboration, very, very slow processes the bigger the company. And I encourage you to think about that. But if you do find yourself to possess those qualities and you think that this is for you, then just keep going. And I would recommend setting up those parallel paths where education is this constant thing. You're always reading books. You're not cramming books, but you're always reading some interesting things on the field of product management, technology, and business. you're consuming a little bit of content, check out my YouTube channel and let me know if you want any other stuff, any other pieces of topics you want me to cover on that channel. I'm happy to do that. But you're also always building as much as possible. So even if you have a job and you're working somewhere right now, unless it's all consuming, you should set some time to kind of switch and then see what else you can build, or like put together a group of folks that are interested in the same stuff. See what problems you can solve for yourself, for your friends, family, other interesting stuff. There's so many interesting things to do. They don't have to be scaled to an exorbitant amount. They can be small scale, and you still get very, very relevant and beneficial experience. And then continue applying. Yeah, and I think Aditya said don't self-reject for sure. Yeah, I don't get that, but it happens a lot, right? You just apply, and then you apply some more, and you make a list of the companies you want to work on, and you continue just heading there, build up your network, right? You're doing all of these things simultaneously. And I promise it's all going to come together. I know that because you're already in the self-selected cohort, so I can safely say that, and I know I'll be right. You can write me in 5 years and let me know how everything worked out very well. Those are my closing thoughts. Oh, and also, of course, yes, watch the YouTube channel, subscribe, and let me know if there's anything else you'd like to see in the channel. And thanks for joining us.
Yes, please follow the channel if you want. And you can also continue asking the questions that we were not able to cover in this 1 hour session. The link has been posted in the chat. And thank you all for joining. And thank you, Alex, for helping us through the process and guiding us in the recruitment journey.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for having me.
Some of us hope to see you in Google someday. But, yeah.
Sounds good. Yes, I will look forward to it. Thanks very much, Aditi. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you. Bye-bye.